How's it going, everyone? Today I'll be doing a video of basically what I wrote down in this blog post. So I wrote a Temporal app as part of this app challenge that I'm doing for myself to learn Temporal better. It's a simple web consumer app, and in this video I'll be going over what it does and how I'm using Temporal and what benefits Temporal gives me in this particular application. All right, so I'll head over to the GitHub repo, which I've also documented here. This has all the code for the application, so you can get it running on your own if you'd like. First of 20 applications that I'm challenging myself to create. So this application is just a simple webhook consumer, takes a payload in, starts a temporal workflow, and then saves the temporal workflow, then saves the payload to DynamoDB. So let me go through a quick diagram here of what it does at a high level. So if here on the left, the client sends in a webhook event to my webhook API. I then start a temporal workflow. Right after I've started a temporal workflow, I can return back 200 to the client, because once I start a temporal workflow, because Temporal has the guarantees of a durable execution platform, I can just say, hey, I've recorded it. I don't actually need to record it all the way in DynamoDB yet. I can just start the workflow and knowing that Temporal is going to eventually save it into the database. So I think that's a pretty cool pattern there that you can kind of quickly return back saying that, hey, I got it, basically an ACK, and then I'm not going to lose it. All right, and then we start the workflow here, and the temporal server records that workflow that it needs to be processed. The temporal worker then fetches this task and starts execution on the task. And I've created a temporal activity. It has basically just one activity right now, which saves the payload to DynamoDB. So that's what it does here. And then eventually the worker reports back that it has finished back to the server. So let's do a demo here. That's the exciting part. So I have it running locally. Actually, let me start it back up here. I've got it running, and I can just do a quick overview of the code, just a quick walkthrough. So here's the API endpoint, post mapping, and here's where I handled the webhook. I basically extract the fields out of the JSON, grab the webhook ID, use the webhook ID, which I call a workflow ID here, which I'll get into in a minute, and pass the payload into this start webhook workflow method that I have configured in my webhook service. And this will start a workflow in Temporal asynchronously. So basically, if this line passes, this line 39, it succeeds, then I log and I return back 200 OK. And then it'll go, and like I said earlier, it will Temporal will go and save it into DynamoDB. So let's see it actually working. So I'm here in Postman. Here is the post endpoint that I'm sending to. So let me send in one message. Okay, it says it's processing, and the webhook was completed successfully. So let's go and look in DynamoDB. I'm going to hit a refresh here, and you'll see that that one event did get saved. So that's the happy path, and Temporal is handling the publishing and saving to DynamoDB. Okay, so I put together a quick list here of a few things to demo specifically to Temporal and why I'm using Temporal here. So Temporal gives us durable execution, right? So let's demo cutting the connection to DynamoDB. So what I'm going to do is cut my Wi-Fi off. Okay, so my Wi-Fi is off, and I'm talking to a remote DynamoDB. So that means my application right now cannot talk to DynamoDB. That connection is severed. But I have a local Temporal server running and everything, and my server here is also local, so it doesn't need to go external. So that means I can hit Postman here, and I'll still get back a 200. Okay, but my application is going to be freaking out here because it can't reach DynamoDB because I cut my Wi-Fi, right? So what is happening here is that Temporal right here, I've saved the payload and that workflow ID to Temporal. So it now has stored it in its server. So I can do a refresh here. There's a little UI that comes with Temporal that shows all of the workflows that are currently running. So I did a bunch earlier, so that's why some here are completed. But you can see one here in blue is running. So that's the one I just submitted. So if I click into it, you see that it's tried, I think, 6 times, or this is the 6th time that it's trying. Attempt number 7, next retry is in 20 seconds. So let me turn my Wi-Fi back on. Okay, and in the background, right, Temporal is trying to retry writing to DynamoDB in that temporal activity, and I could show you that code here. So I have an activity defined, and all this activity does is save the webhook to DynamoDB, but this of course is failing over and over again because it can't reach DynamoDB, but eventually it will succeed. Let me scroll down here because the network has now been reestablished. And so webhook processing is now complete. So if I go to DynamoDB, I should see 2 records here now. One from before and then one that just processed. Okay, so now I see that it's processed there. And then I go back to the UI for Temporal, and you can see it's now turned green, which is awesome. So that means that it kept trying in the background, and then eventually it succeeded and marked that workflow as complete. Okay, so the big key thing there is that events are still saved because the Temporal server persists them, and it processes it later when it can. So it keeps trying behind the scenes, which means you do not need to write any custom retries or anything like that. Temporal is handling all of that for you behind the scenes. So as a developer, that's super nice. I just can write an activity and know that it's eventually going to get published and it's going to succeed. I don't have to write a bunch of error handling or retries and state management stuff, which is awesome. Okay, and then number 2 part of the demo here, Temporal has native support for making things idempotent. So idempotency means that if I do the same thing over and over again, I get the same result back. And basically we want to make sure that if the webhook producer sends us duplicate webhooks, we still want to only record it once, but return 200 each time saying, hey, we've received it. So it's just good practice in distributed systems. So to simulate that, I'm just gonna change this UUID to 1234. Okay, because I'm using this webhook ID as the unique event identifier for a webhook that comes in. So if I go back to my code, I'll show you here in the controller. I extract out the webhook ID and create this web workflow ID. And I'll jump inside this method. You can set a workflow ID. And then I've also set this reuse policy. And I've set the policy so that Temporal will reject any duplicate workflow IDs that come in. So this needs to be a unique ID per workflow, which makes perfect sense for my application here. I want only one webhook to get saved each time that webhook is sent, right? Like I don't want any duplicates in my database. Don't want to have to dedupe it later. So this will control that nature for me. Okay. So let's do that demo here. So that's kind of how it works behind the scenes. Let's see it actually working. So if I send in, actually, let me just delete everything in DynamoDB so it's clearer to see. So I close and delete these. Cool, refresh. I got no items in my table. So go back and I should find 1234, hit send, refresh. Okay, 1234 is there. Now what happens if I send it in again? Hit send and I get a 200. But let's look at the logs and see actually what happens. So I get this warning error that says idempotency check was hit for this payload. Okay. And that happened because Temporal found that there was a duplicate webhook ID that was trying to get sent in as the workflow ID. And so it threw an exception on line 39. And I'm catching that explicitly here with a workflow execution already started exception. So then I log the warning, and then I just return back, hey, 200, so that my webhook producer doesn't accidentally keep sending me this over and over again. As long as I send 200, usually those event messages will stop. Okay, so that's a really cool feature that Temporal gives you out of the box. I mean, typically you'd have to save something in the database and then check against the database to see if, this payload had been processed yet. I mean, you could do it in DynamoDB by, using webhook ID as like the partition key or something like that. But it's just nice you don't have to think about a lot of this stuff with Temporal. You can just write code as if these failures don't really exist. You have to add some of these, catch exceptions and things for this idempotency check, but really that's all I had to do. And then make sure I pass in a unique ID, which is like way less overhead than trying to do idempotency checks on your own and your consumer. Cool. So that is mostly it for this application. Pretty simple. I mean, things I learned were kind of those two things I just showed you. The other thing is just like how to wire everything up. The workers here I had to wire up as beans. I'm using the Spring Boot framework. Usually workers, what I've read about is they're deployed separately, but just for ease of use right now with this application, I deploy them all together in this application. But I think it's smart to deploy workers separately so that they can be scaled kind of horizontally throughout your stack or whatever your needs might be. Anyways, that is my first app I've created. I've already learned a lot about Temporal, and I'm sure I'll be learning a lot more as I continue posting and creating and posting about these other apps that I'll be creating with Temporal to help learn. So hope it helps someone out there, and let me know any feedback in the comments. Thanks a lot.